Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to get into something that, well, you might not think about every day, but it's actually super important to the health of the planet, and that is tropical tree seed handling.
Oh, yeah.
We are diving into the introduction of the book Tropical Forest Seed by Lars Schmidt to kind of uncover why these tiny seeds play such a huge role
Yeah.
in so many different things, from reforestation to fuel wood and, you know,
Absolutely.
even to your morning cup of coffee.
That's right. And what's interesting is that even grabbing a seed from a tropical forest and planting it is
Yeah.
more complicated than it seems.
Yeah, that's what I thought was so surprising when I was reading through this. It's like,
Right.
it's not just about sticking a seed in the ground and hoping for the best.
Yeah.
There's a whole science behind it.
Yeah, definitely.
What was something that really stood out to you as just particularly interesting?
Well, one other thing that fascinates me is just the fact that our understanding of this field is always evolving. We're not just relying on the latest technology, although that does play a role.
Yeah.
But it's this really cool interplay between scientific research in the labs and the practical experience
Yeah?
of people who are actually out there, planting and managing these forests.
So you're talking about the theory versus like the real world application.
Exactly. Like, for example, we're seeing advances like computerized documentation systems that can track the origin and quality of seeds with incredible detail. But then on the ground, particularly in developing countries, economic factors often limit the access to those technologies.
So even if we have these really high-tech tools,
Right.
they're not always reaching the people that maybe need them most.
Exactly. And that leads us to a challenge that's highlighted throughout the book, which is creating a quality seed supply that's accessible to everyone.
Okay.
There's this really frustrating gap between the demand for these seeds
Uh-huh.
and the ability to actually meet that demand.
So there's a seed shortage, but I'm guessing it's more complicated than that.
Yeah, you're right. There are several layers to this problem.
Okay.
One of the biggest is affordability.
Okay.
Many people who need these seeds, especially small-scale farmers, they simply can't afford that higher cost of quality seeds,
Yeah.
even though those seeds would ultimately produce better trees
Right.
and have greater long-term benefits.
Right. So it's short-term cost versus long-term gain.
Exactly. It's that age-old dilemma.
Yeah, for sure.
Um,
But even if they can afford it,
right.
how do we actually get those seeds to the people that need them?
Distribution. That's another major bottleneck.
Okay.
Imagine trying to get seeds to remote areas sometimes without well-developed roads or transportation systems.
Yeah.
The book points out that most suppliers only operate within a limited area,
Okay.
making it a huge logistical challenge to get those quality seeds to everyone who needs them.
So we've got affordability, we've got accessibility, other things are kind of standing in the way of making sure that we have a reliable seed supply.
This is where it gets really interesting. Documentation, or rather, the lack of it? You might get a batch of seeds, but how do you know what you're getting?
Right.
Without proper records of a seed's origin, its genetic quality, even the species it belongs to.
Wow.
It's like navigating a minefield.
So it's a transparency issue.
Exactly. And this lack of transparency opens the door for deception,
Right.
which further erodes trust in the system.
Sure.
You can't be sure what you're getting. Why invest in quality?
No, sounds like a vicious cycle.
It is.
What about the long-term perspective here? Because, we're talking about trees.
Yeah.
It takes a long time for them to grow.
Absolutely. Forestry operates on a timescale that most industries don't have to deal with.
Right.
It takes years, sometimes decades, to see the full benefits of planting a tree, let alone an entire forest. And this makes it tough to prove the value and quality seeds, especially when there are more immediate needs to address.
It's like trying to convince someone to invest in retirement when they're struggling to make ends meet today.
That's a great way to put it.
It's like,
Yeah.
It's so crucial for the future, but the payoff seems so far away.
Yeah, and that long-term perspective brings us to another major force at play, the shift towards market economies.
So how has the way that we value forests, particularly in a market-driven world,
Yeah.
how has that impacted all of this?
Well, think about it. Short rotation species.
Okay.
The kinds of trees that can be grown and harvested quickly for profit.
Yeah.
They do really well in a market-driven system.
They do.
But what about those species that take decades to mature? or the ones that are crucial for biodiversity but might not have a direct commercial value,
Yeah.
they often get left behind.
So the invisible hand of the market doesn't always guide us towards the most sustainable choices.
Unfortunately, you're right, and that's why the book really emphasizes the need for something more than just market forces to guide responsible forestry.
This is where things get really interesting for our listeners.
Yeah.
Think about the products that you use every day. Furniture, paper, building materials. Are those products coming from forests that are being managed for the long term, for diversity, for the health of the entire ecosystem?
That's the question we all need to be asking ourselves.
Yeah.
And understanding the complexities of something as seemingly simple as seed handling can help us make more informed choices.
For sure. And we are back, and I'm still thinking about that last point about how our choices as consumers actually connect back to the health of forests. It's pretty amazing.
It is.
How something so tiny, like a seed,
It really is.
can have such a big impact.
It highlights the interconnectedness of it all.
Yeah.
Speaking of seeds, before we left off, we were starting to touch on the debate between vegetative propagation and seed propagation.
Yeah, let's dig into that a little bit more, because I think some of our listeners are probably wondering, what are the pros and cons of each approach?
Well, with vegetative propagation, you're essentially creating clones of a parent tree.
Okay.
Whether it's through cuttings or
Yeah.
tissue culture.
Yeah.
And this method has gained popularity, especially for plantations,
Okay.
where the goal is to produce trees with very specific traits, like fast growth or disease resistance.
So you're guaranteeing consistency,
Yeah,
which I can imagine is really important from a production standpoint.
right.
But I imagine there are some trade-offs there.
Yeah, the biggest concern is the potential loss of genetic diversity.
Okay.
Remember, we're talking about creating a forest of genetically identical trees.
Right.
And while that might seem efficient, it can actually create vulnerability.
Vulnerability to what, specifically?
Well, think about it. What happens if a new disease emerges that these trees have no resistance to?
Okay.
Or if the climate changes in a way that makes their environment less hospitable?
Right.
A forest with low genetic diversity is like putting all your eggs in one basket.
Put all your eggs in one basket. Right. That's what they always say.
Exactly. Spread the risk.
Spread their risk.
So how does seed propagation fit into this?
Yeah. How does that fit in?
That's where seed propagation really shines. When you plant trees from seeds, you're tapping into that natural variation within a species.
Okay.
Each seed has its own unique genetic makeup, which means the forest as a whole is more adaptable and resilient.
Okay, so it's like diversifying your investment portfolio.
Exactly.
You're spreading the risk
Yeah.
and increasing your chances.
Right.
That at least some of your trees are going to make it no matter what challenges come up.
Exactly. And that's why the book emphasizes that seed propagation is especially crucial for environmental plantings,
Right.
where the goal is to create a forest that can adapt and evolve over the long term,
Gotcha.
not just for a single harvest cycle.
Right. We're talking about building a forest for the future, not just for today.
Yeah.
So it sounds like both methods have their place.
Yeah, that's right.
Vegetative propagation is great
Mm-hmm.
for those specific goals and a controlled setting.
Yep.
But seed propagation
Yeah,
is really essential for maintaining that genetic diversity
exactly.
that makes forests resilient and adaptable.
Now, the book also talks about the historical context of seed handling, specifically the shift from a more public sector-driven approach
Right.
to a more market-driven one.
Right. How has that impacted things?
It's been a pretty dramatic shift.
Yeah.
In the past, when seed handling was primarily a public sector activity, the focus was often on broader societal goals,
Wow.
like reforestation, conservation, even making sure that local communities had enough fuel wood.
So it was more about the common good
Exactly.
than about profit.
Exactly. But as markets took over, the emphasis shifted towards species that could be grown and harvested quickly for profit.
Right.
And as we've already discussed, that often comes at the expense of biodiversity and long-term forest health.
So it's that classic tension between short-term gains
It is.
and long-term sustainability.
Yeah, it seems like we need a way to balance those two.
Yeah, for sure.
And the book highlights the important role that consumers can play in this.
Okay.
When we demand products from sustainably managed forests, we send a signal to the market that long-term health and diversity matter.
So it all comes back to, making conscious choices
Right.
about the products we buy.
Absolutely.
Supporting companies that are doing things the right way can make a real difference.
Now, speaking of doing things the right way, another critical aspect the book delves into is the issue of documentation.
Yes. Let's talk about the paperwork.
Yeah, we touched on it earlier.
I have a feeling this is more than just a bureaucratic hurdle.
You're right. The lack of proper documentation can have huge consequences.
Okay.
Think about it. If you're planting a forest, you need to know where those seeds came from,
Yeah.
what species they are, their genetic background.
Right.
Without accurate records, it's like playing a guessing game with the future of your forest.
So you're saying that a seed's history, its pedigree, is just as important as its present condition.
And without that information, you can't guarantee that the trees you're planting are well suited to their environment, or that they'll be resilient to future challenges.
So what are some of the specific problems that are caused by poor documentation?
Well, one issue is that it makes it almost impossible to track the origin of seeds,
Okay.
which makes it easier for unscrupulous sellers to misrepresent the quality or species of their seeds.
Right, so it's a trust issue.
Absolutely.
They have to be able to verify
Right.
that you're getting what you paid for.
And this lack of trust discourages investment in quality seeds.
Right.
Why pay a premium if you can't be sure of what you're getting?
It's buyer beware.
Yeah.
But in this case, it's not just about getting ripped off. It's about,
Exactly.
potentially jeopardizing the health of a whole forest.
Exactly. The book emphasizes the need for clear standards for seed documentation and robust systems to enforce those standards.
Okay.
It's about creating transparency and accountability.
So we're talking about a paper trail that follows those seeds from,
Yeah.
the forest floor to the nursery to the planting site.
A system that allows us to trace the origins of every tree
Okay.
and understand its genetic makeup.
Okay, so let's say we have a system in place that ensures, accurate documentation.
Right.
What are some of the other challenges that stand in the way of proving the value of quality seeds?
This is where that long-term nature of forestry makes things tricky.
Okay.
It's incredibly difficult to isolate the impact of seed quality from all the other factors that influence how a tree grows and survives.
Like soil conditions, weather patterns,
Yeah,
pests,
precisely.
even just how the trees are planted and cared for.
You might have the best seeds in the world, but if you plant them in the wrong place or don't manage them properly, they won't thrive.
So it's like trying to determine if a person's good health is due to their genes
That's a great analogy.
or their lifestyle. It's hard to tease those things apart.
It is, and this makes it difficult to make a strong economic argument
Okay.
for investing in quality seeds,
Yeah.
even though experience tells us that better seeds lead to better trees.
Right.
Proving that connection definitively is really difficult.
It seems like we need a way to kind of bridge that gap
Yeah.
between that intuitive understanding and the scientific proof.
And that's where education and outreach come in.
Okay.
If we can educate people about the importance of seed quality and how it impacts everything,
Yeah.
from the resilience of forests to the livelihoods of people who depend on them, we can start to shift the conversation.
So it's about empowering people to make informed decisions,
Exactly.
whether they're choosing seeds for their own land or supporting policies that promote sustainable forestry.
Exactly. And that brings us to another fascinating aspect of this topic.
Okay.
The relationship between traditional knowledge and modern science.
Yeah. Tell me more about how those two worlds intersect.
Well, for centuries, people in tropical regions have been managing their forests and selecting seeds based on their own observations and experience.
Okay.
This traditional knowledge is incredibly valuable,
Yeah.
but it's often passed down orally and not formally documented.
So there's a risk of that knowledge being lost
That's right.
as generations change and as things become more modernized.
And that's where modern science can play a role.
Okay.
By combining traditional knowledge with scientific methods,
Yeah.
we can gain a deeper understanding of these complex ecosystems and how to manage them sustainably.
So it's about bridging the gap between the wisdom of the elders and the rigor of scientific inquiry.
Exactly. And this collaboration can lead to remarkable discoveries.
Oh, wow. Like what?
For example, scientists are working with indigenous communities to identify trees with unique genetic traits.
Wow.
That might hold the key to adapting to climate change.
That's amazing.
So it's a two-way street.
Yeah.
Traditional knowledge informs science, and science helps to preserve and amplify that knowledge.
Right. Very cool. Now, all of this is happening against the backdrop of an incredible challenge.
Okay.
The sheer diversity of tree species found in tropical forests.
Yes, we've talked about the tropics being biodiversity hotspots.
Yeah.
But how does that create a challenge for seed handling? Well, imagine trying to develop seed handling protocols for thousands of different tree species,
Wow.
each with its own unique set of requirements.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot.
It's a monumental task.
Yeah, it's like trying to write an instruction manual for every living thing in a rainforest.
Yeah, it's overwhelming.
Yeah.
That's why prioritization becomes crucial.
Okay.
Scientists and forest managers have to focus their efforts on the species that are most important,
Right.
whether it's for ecological, economic, or cultural reasons.
So making strategic choices
Exactly.
and recognizing that we can't do everything at once.
Right. We need to focus our efforts where they'll have the biggest impact.
For sure.
And this brings us to another key point, the importance of collaboration.
Okay.
No one person or organization can tackle this challenge alone.
Right.
We need to work together, sharing knowledge, resources, and expertise.
It's a global effort.
It is.
Requires cooperation across borders, disciplines, sectors, all of it.
And that's what makes this topic so fascinating.
Yeah.
It's not just about seeds and trees.
Right.
It's about people, culture, economics, and the future of our planet.
This has been such a journey already, and I'm excited to see where we go in the final part of this deep dive.
We still have a lot of ground to cover, so stay with us.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into tropical tree seed handling. We've covered so much ground already.
We have.
It's really amazing to see how something as small as a seed, connects to these huge global issues.
Yeah.
Now, before we wrap up, I wanted to touch on one more challenge that I think is really relevant to our listeners, and that is this idea of balancing conservation with utilization.
Yeah.
How do we make sure that we're using these forests responsibly without,
Right.
destroying the very things that make them so valuable?
That is the million-dollar question. And the book argues that seed handling practices are right at the heart of that balancing act.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about how seeds fit into this.
Well, if you think about it, if we're only planting a limited number of species, those that are easiest to grow, or maybe most profitable in the short term, we're basically creating these monocultures.
And as we've talked about, those monocultures are really vulnerable.
Exactly.
One disease comes in, one pest comes in.
Right. Wipes out the whole thing.
And that's it. And they also just don't support the same level of biodiversity that you would find in a mixed species forest.
Exactly.
So through, carefully selecting and managing our seed sources, we can make sure that we're planting a diversity of trees that's going to create a more resilient, just more vibrant ecosystem.
It's not just about planting more trees. It's about planting the right trees.
It's about planting the right trees and, looking beyond just those obvious choices.
Right.
And thinking about those lesser known species that might not have like the immediate commercial value, but are so important for the overall health of the forest.
Yeah, it's recognizing that interconnectedness of the ecosystem. Yeah. Understanding that every species has a part to play.
Right.
Even the ones that we might not think about.
Now, the book even goes further than this. And it actually challenges kind of that traditional model of conservation where we're setting aside these protected areas and just trying to minimize human impact as much as possible.
Right.
And it suggests that a more sustainable approach is actually to integrate conservation with utilization.
Yeah.
So it's about finding ways for people and forests to coexist and thrive together.
Exactly. And seed handling is so crucial here because it makes sure that the trees that are being planted are well suited to the environment and can provide those resources sustainably.
So it's like creating this positive feedback loop.
It is.
Healthy forests provide for people, and then people in turn take care of those forests.
Exactly.
And them to stay healthy.
But that shift in thinking requires more than just good science and, sound management practices. It also requires education and outreach.
So we need to raise awareness about these issues and empower people to make informed choices.
Absolutely. Everyone has a role to play. From the scientists who are studying these trees to the farmers who are planting them to the consumers who are buying the products that they produce.
It's a collective effort.
It is.
It's a shared responsibility for, these incredible ecosystems.
And it all comes back to that tiny seed, a starting point for everything.
They say, we've been on this deep dive together now for 3 parts.
Yeah.
And I am feeling really hopeful,
That's great.
It's so inspiring to see all the effort that's going into protecting these forests and finding ways to manage them sustainably.
It's a reminder that even small actions can make a difference.
Right.
The choices that we make every day, Even something as simple as buying sustainably sourced wood products
Uh-huh.
can contribute to a healthier future for these forests.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this final part, what's like the one key message you would like to leave our listeners with?
I would say the future of our forests depends on understanding and valuing the incredible journey of that tiny seed,
Oh, wow.
from its origins in the forest to its potential to create a more sustainable world.
Beautifully said, and thank you to all of our listeners for joining us
Yes, thank you.
on this incredible deep dive.
We hope you learned something.
We hope you learned something new and that you've gained a new appreciation for
Yeah.
the wonders of tropical trees and how vital they are to our lives.
Remember, keep those minds curious and those trees growing.